Hello and welcome back to ID 24 2018, brought to you in partnership with Barclays Access, the Paciello Group, Microsoft Edge, Intopia, and Open Access Technologies. A reminder that you can subscribe to our YouTube channel by heading over to youtube.com/inclusive design 24. And if you like this upcoming talk or any of the others, please consider hitting that like button and showing your support. You can also ask our presenters questions by following at ID.conf or ID24conf on Twitter, or just tweeting the questions with the ID24 hashtag. We're joined in this hour by ID24U London and everyone at Goldsmiths and the Department of Computing in the University of London. So hello, everybody in London.
Next up, we have Bindu Upadhyay and Anna Hornberger, and they're going to be talking about understanding cultural differences and their impact on design. So over to you, Bindu and Anna.
Hello, everyone. Hi. This is Bindu and Anna. Oh, God. Yeah.
Nice to meet you. And we will share the slides now. I hope you can see them.
Yeah.
So hello, hola, and namaste. I'm Anna Hornberger, and this is my colleague Bindu. And a German, an Indian, and a Spaniard walk into a room. Sounds like an opening for a joke or a story, but this is often our reality. We met at We Are Reasonable People, a company where at the time 45 people were working, and we were from 18 different nationalities. And this international environment was quite enriching and made us aware a lot about all these different cultures during lunches and when we worked in teams, and also, of course, during Friday drinks. And this is where we started, together with our colleague Marta Axpe, to work on this topic of cultural differences. However, I was already all my life curious about other countries and cultures, and this led me to leave Germany and go 1 year to England when I was 16 to do a high school year. And for example, there was a lot of things different than in Germany. I already saw that in school. For example, teaching was much more applied, which I liked a lot, but it was also all much more formal. And after that, I went to live in 4 more different countries, in Argentina, Italy, Vietnam, and the Netherlands. And I learned over that time what I liked and what I disliked about different countries, and I compared the habits and behaviors to the German habits. However, I was not really fully aware why things were differently. And only during my studies in the Netherlands, in TU Delft, I had a subject called internationalization. And there I learned about theories behind these cultural differences and that they can actually be measured. And when I met Bindu at We Are Reasonable People, we discovered that we have this shared interest. And Bindu will tell you a little bit more now what is her interest in this topic.
Yeah. So when I was working in India and when I lived in India, when people would ask me, where are you from? It was a very difficult question to answer because I lived in multiple locations in India and they all had different vibe. However, when I moved to the Netherlands in the first year, when people asked me, where are you from? I would just say, yeah, I'm from India. And it was a simple discussion. But as I make this place a bit more my home, and now when people ask me, where are you from? I once again find myself struggling to answer because when I say I'm from Rotterdam, the next question I get is, but where are you really from? And this is, yeah, it puts me in a fix. However, the reason why I'm interested in this topic is when I was working earlier in India and studying, it was quite a monoculture. We were all from the same country, similar backgrounds of education. And when I moved to the Netherlands and started working at We Are Reasonable People and TU Eindhoven, I was interacting with people from many different countries. And at that point, I realized that I have to learn how to adapt and how to respect people from other cultures, how to understand their communication cues so that, I continue being a great person as I would like to be. So that triggered the interest in this topic. So today we are going to talk about understanding cultural differences and their impact on design. So first of all, as every designer should ask, why are we talking about this topic? These days, we are all working on global products and also have global teams. This leads to diversity of thought, and I believe we believe in diversity of thought and the power that it brings. However, sometimes, though we have people from different nationalities, we are not really embracing the differences. Also, I think that diversity and inclusion, they both go hand in hand. So just having a diverse group doesn't help unless they all feel included and that they can contribute. At this point, I also, when I applied to speak for this conference, I wanted to broaden the understanding of inclusion. Inclusion to me goes beyond accessibility. It means making people feel included with different ideas and different forms and functions. So that is why we are interested in this topic. We think that inclusive design lies at the junction of context, character, and culture. However, when we are designing, we do focus on the context of our users in the form of demographics, their characters, likes and dislikes through persona. And culture is often neglected or ignored. I think this comes because we believe that if we focus on individual differences, that will be enough. I also used to strongly agree with this because I didn't want to be treated as a product of my environment. Just I am who I am. Um, but then I came. But then there are stereotypes such as this, that Bollywood or Indian movies are all about dance and music, or another meme about what the Dutch do and what other people think we do. These looking at these stereotypes, it makes you think that yes, I am who I am. I don't want to be associated with a particular region or nationality. But then I came across Chimamanda's TED talk, The Danger of a Single Story, and this talk struck a chord with me. She says the single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. And I completely agree with this. And that opened my eyes about the topic of stereotypes and embracing differences. So I think it is important that we focus on the cultural aspect as well of our users, of our teammates, and even in very complex situations, understanding the impact of cultural differences may help us in discovering a new approach. For example, when you travel, you can observe that culture has a huge impact on behavior, on what we see, what we think, and what we do. So, how can we become aware of cultures if we can't spend many months traveling to these countries and immersing ourselves over there? Thanks to Geert Hofstede, he came up with cultural dimensions. And he did this research with over 100,000 IBM employees in between 1967 and 1973, initially across 40 largest countries. He first came up with 4 dimensions and then added 2 more. And as you can see, these are the 6 dimensions that he has. For example, power, distance, individualism, masculinity, and so on. So, a small quiz time. If we look at the McDonald's websites from these 3 countries, and let's put the stereotypes in our heads to some practical use. If we had to guess where they're from, what would your guess be? Anna, do you want to guess?
I will
Yeah.
let you solve it.
Yeah, so they're from Germany, Japan, and USA. And in this case, we are going to take the example of McDonald's website to compare some of these dimensions. So Hofstede came up with numerical values for each country and for each dimension. And there are tools available online also on his website where you can compare various countries. So in this one, we compare Germany, Japan, and United States. And if we focus on individualism, we notice that United States is quite high on it, whereas Japan has a low value. And do you think this is reflected in the design of the website? We think so, and this is our interpretation. If you look at the American website, there is emphasis on words such as you, order on your time, and pick up on your terms. That can be explained because US has very high value for individualism. And also there is a priority of having the email list where people can subscribe to get promotions to their inbox. However, if we look at the Japanese website, the burgers and the fries are all moving on the sushi, and it has the sushi table metaphor. And there is also the recommended menu. So, low individualistic cultures tend to make decisions based on what's best for the group. And in this case, McDonald's is recommending a menu based on what they think is the best for the group. When we applied this and also started discussing this, we had some thoughts on these dimensions. There is a lot of articles online also about the criticism or a critical take on Hofstede's dimensions. We think that this research was done in an organizational setting. So, how people think and behave in an organizational setting might be different from how people would be in social situations. Also, there is a lot of emphasis on nationalities. And these days, the difference between nationalities and ethnicity is very relevant. Also, not just due to the size of some countries being very large, but also due to their own culture and upbringing. Also, the last one, globalization. For example, grew up watching a lot of American cartoon channels and TV series. And this, I think, has an impact on how we behave and how we are interacting with other people. That was not the case back in 1970s, or not as widely popular as now. But if we manage to stay open-minded, I think Hofstede's cultural dimensions can shed some light on what it is that makes cultures so different from each other, and most importantly, how can we be more sensitive when designing for a cross-cultural user experience. A small story. So while we were working on a presentation at work, we once went back and forth on the storyline. I felt that we need to explain the theory first and then give the examples to support it. Whereas my colleague felt that we first need to show the application or the examples first and then later explain the theory. This took a while, and we decided, and then only a few moments later, also we realized that this could be a cultural difference in the persuasion style, and this was explained by Erin Meyer. In this case, I was more from the concept first approach, where I was emphasizing on the why, and whereas my colleague was emphasizing on the how. And as we can see on this scale, different countries are spread across and they might have different approaches. And this is explained by Erin Meyer in her culture map, where she has 8 parameters and she has mapped a lot of countries on this scale, representing various styles of communication. It can be relevant while conducting user research, building an international team, or dealing with companies, third party agencies that are involved in your projects. And for example, Erin Meyer doesn't give absolute numbers to any of these countries. So this is based on relative positioning. And this, if you look at scheduling as a parameter from her map, Germany, for example, is on the extreme with they're very particular about time and very punctual, whereas India is on the other extreme, and France is somewhere in between. So for someone from France or for someone from Germany, they might think that the French and the Indian people are not as punctual. Whereas for someone from France, it could be that they think that the Germans are way too punctual and the Indians are not. And for someone from India, Germans and French people are very punctual. So this difference of perception arises because it's all a relative positioning. And we think this is an interesting concept, especially if you have people from different countries in a team. Also, her dimensions are based on communication, and it is very relevant for business communication. So, as we speak about communication, I think Anna will give us some more insights on this topic.
Yeah, I would like to actually start with a short video that I'm going to play to you.
The Waltham residence. Oh, yes. Is this Emily's parents' house? This is the housekeeper speaking. And by the way, young lady, that is not how one addresses a person on the telephone. First, one identifies and asks for the person with whom one wishes to speak. What are you saying? Now, let us try that again. No! Oh! Oh, my God!
So as you can see, there were two people speaking the same language, but addressing each other and saluting each other in a very different way. So they have a very different perception of how to do that. And this also happens often to me. So I can be addressed as Dear Mrs. Hornberger or as Hi Anna. And so why is this? And how can we find out what is the right way of addressing people from different cultures? And let's imagine a company needs to send an email to users with different cultural backgrounds. And so let's take the example of me. So we have here, hello Anna, dear Miss Hornberger, or hi Hornberger Anna. These are three different ways of how I could be addressed. And we took the example of China, Germany, and the Netherlands. So you can see that. Hello Anna would be how I would be addressed in Germany. Dear Miss in the Netherlands, sorry. Dear Miss Hornberger would be how I would be addressed in Germany, and Hi Hornberger Anna would be how I would be addressed in China. And it's quite interesting. If we look now at the Gerd Hofstede and we look at the dimensions of power, distance, and masculinity, it's quite interesting that we can see Germany and the Netherlands are actually not so close to each other, whereas China and Germany seem much more close to each other, even though we would think these cultures are further away from each other. But if we now look at masculinity, Germany and China are actually the same. And what is so masculinity compares how cultures are more competitive. So masculine cultures, they're more formal because they're more competitive and not so tender and informal as feminine countries as the Netherlands. That's why in the Netherlands you're very informal. Also in China you have a very high power distance, which means the surname has to be named first. It's a sign of respect, but it's also high context culture, which is showing that the surname is it's showing where you are from and where you belong in your family. So it has to be named first, and then the first name comes. And if we look here at the design critique and feedback, I have a nice example from the Dutch Anglo Translation Guide. And if we if we look at what is said by a British person, for example, that's not bad. British means actually this is good or even very good, whereas the Dutch would understand that's poor or mediocre. And if the British would say, please think about that some more, he would actually think, yeah, that's not such a good idea and don't do it. And the Dutch would probably say, yeah, think about it some more. It's great. Keep developing it. So you see, there can be quite some difficulties in talking to each other. So we have some recommendations about if you give feedback or design critique to colleagues from other cultural backgrounds. We would recommend to look at the context. So in which setting is this happening? Who else is present? And how formal or informal is this feedback giving? Is it announced beforehand or are you just passing by? Who are you giving the feedback to? Is this person higher or lower in hierarchy to you? And is that important for that person of that country? And what kind of words do you use? So depending whether it's a nationality with a direct or indirect feedback approach, you should use upgraders or downgraders to make it less or more direct, to use something like absolutely, totally to make it more strong, or sort of, a little, or maybe, or slightly to make it less strong. And we would say you can look at the dimensions from Hofstede, which is power distance, masculinity, and uncertainty avoidance, whereas with Erin Meyer, we would recommend to look at communication, evaluating, leading, and disagreeing. So Bindu will tell you a little bit more about cultural differences in design practice.
Yes, so if we look at the areas of design practice, we have some examples from design strategy, user research, and interface design. So for design strategy, as you know, recently India got its first IKEA. And this picture is from my hometown, where all the people, there's a huge traffic jam and everyone's rushing to IKEA. But I choose the example of Uber, and I'm comparing my experience in India and in the Netherlands. So Uber, when it came to India, they had to at some point introduce cash payments because people are used to paying by cash, and also about referrals. So Uber had to actually set up a whole new infrastructure to support cash payments for drivers, and because they take a small amount, an amount from the drivers, how would that happen? And they had to rethink this aspect quite a bit. So if you do research, you could be aware of what could be the implications of such an infrastructure change and how to launch your existing product in a new country. And also in India, we have a lot of referrals. It's very common whenever a new application or a new service is in the market, they give a lot of referral options for people. And because India also is a bit of a collectivist mentality, this works fine. So friends and families are always sharing the promotional codes and referrals, and there is a lot of publicity that happens through word of mouth. To come up with good design strategy, of course, we need to do good user research. Anna will now explain her experience with user research.
So yeah, research has many components where things can go wrong when doing it in different cultures, and we have to pay attention to our own behavior as the facilitator or the interview to not offend people and to gain their trust, but we also have to be able to interpret the behavior and the answers of that user's rights. So I did a few years back, I was doing co-creation sessions and interviews in Vietnam together with university students from agriculture and sustainability, as well as companies from the food sector. And there were several difficulties that we discovered. So one thing we did in the workshops was evaluating the current products of the companies with post-its of like and dislike. And as you can see in this picture, there were the red ones, there were the dislike ones, and there were very little. So when we look at the evaluating scale from Erin Meyer, we can see in Vietnam, there is very indirect negative feedback, whereas in Germany and also the Netherlands, the context where I'm living now and I was living then, it's very direct negative feedback. So keeping that in mind, we adjusted a bit our method, and we let them post the post-its anonymously, and afterwards talked about it in the group, whereas not everybody had to come forward with their own negative and positive feedback, but we also called them improvements instead of negative feedback, and that helped us to get much more insights. Another thing was scheduling. So I was planning these sessions, and in Germany, we are, as you can see in the scheduling thing of Erin Meyer, we are very punctual and very taking time, very linear. So I planned a session from 10 till 1, and I needed that time, and people were coming between 10 and 11 somewhere, and I didn't really know what was the reason for it. And then also looked into this, and discussed with my Vietnamese colleagues, and what we did to solve this is we started actually at 9 o'clock and with breakfast, and allowed them to come from 9 to 10 to make sure that they would come in time. So we start 1 hour earlier. And I have also I found some research from a assistant professor from TU Delft, Annemiek van Boye. And she did her PhD on cultural differences, and she developed a framework on what we can do to check when we do creative sessions in different cultural contexts. So on the left, you can see the different barriers that she discovered, like trust, credibility, language, values, attitude, and education, that can come up. And on the top, you see the different focal points, which are the participants, session materials, facilitators, and that can help you to check all these in this grid, to make sure that you have solutions to cover these problematics. Some other general guidelines is you should have take into account how you salute and how you do the intro. Should take care of your body language, of your clothing, your hierarchy, the hierarchy, people you are dealing with, scheduling, and location. And so now we also have an example of user interface design. We come back to the McDonald's example, and we will check navigation, because navigation is very crucial to using any product and any website. And we will see how uncertainty avoidance plays a role in this. And so first of all, uncertainty avoidance is to which extent people are not comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. And in terms of navigation, this means that we have to see how much people want to be guided or how much people want to find their own way in a web page or in software. And if we now look at the different countries, again, we here see the US menu, and the US is very low, or the lowest in uncertainty avoidance. And if you look at the menu, you click on the menu, and on the left you have all the different categories, and on the right you can directly dive into different food items. Also underneath you can still see the web page, and you can choose everything. So this shows that there are many different options for the user to go in many different directions. So that's no wonder that they're quite low in the uncertainty avoidance. We go to Germany, they're kind of a middle ground. You choose on the top the path you want to go, and then you can go into different directions. So yeah, once you have chosen your path, you're open. So that's kind of the middle ground. And if we now look at Japan, it's quite different. It's very linear. It really goes from the top to the bottom, and you just can scroll down. So there's one direction. And also in the bottom, we can see here, on the bottom, the menu is repeated, and that is not with written icons, but with icons, which even puts more emphasis on helping you. Where are you in the website, and giving you more guidance. So no wonder they are very high in the uncertainty avoidance. So in general, some tips for when you're creating navigation structures for different cultural backgrounds. Think about how your users relate to uncertainty avoidance, and explore the number of options to give. Is it guided? Is it not guided? And so on. And we would also like to share our ideas on these cultural dimensions and how to use them. And I will come back to Annemiek van Boye, because she also did a study on Hoofdsted's dimensions. And so she tested students from 6 different countries, and she compared their personal profiles on Hoofdstede to the country profiles. And that means the personal profiles, it means you can actually make your personal Hoofdstede score by filling out a questionnaire. And she found that the personal values of the students are much closer to each other than the country values. So this shows that the culture of people, the people they live in, or the field of work or study, or the friends they have, of subcultures they are in, they can really largely influence that. So yeah, you can see it's not just the culture they're from. And Hofstede also says that he explains that these dimensions are not a personality test, and he clearly states that you have to take great samples of the culture from all different classes and sectors and fields of work to get a representative sample. And this is also reflected in his questionnaire, even because some of the questions are not addressed to you as filling out the questionnaire, but to people in your surrounding. What would they do? So we were curious about Erin Meyer's culture map. You can also make your personal values and compare them to your country values. However, with her, the questions are really related to you. So we were interested how this behaves with the cultural dimensions, and we filled it out for me and Bindu. And as you can see, we're both not directly the picture of our country, but somewhere between the countries of our origin and the Netherlands, and that's kind of showing already we're influenced by that. And one thing was very interesting. We are both much more egalitarian than the country where we are originating from. And that could be, of course, because we are both designers working in an agency and in an agile environment. And it could also be because we're both living in the Netherlands, which is a very egalitarian country. So as I mentioned, and Bindu mentioned before, these values are always representative to the country where you are from, and you have to actually give in that country. So we were wondering, well, now we are living in the Netherlands, maybe we see the Netherlands as our country. So what happens when we map ourselves relative to the Netherlands? And then you can see our profile looks very different. So on the right, you see the first mapping, and on the left, you see how we mapped it in respect to the Netherlands. And yeah, we're nearly the same as the Netherlands, or much, much closer. And well, as we explained, it is related to your country where you're from. So I do think it can be a good thing to do that, because of course Bindu might understand these questions with her Indian background differently than I understand them. So it's not bad to relate it to India. However, the longer she will live in the Netherlands, the longer she might behave more as a Dutch, and then this culture map becomes a bit difficult for people living in many different countries and cultures, and this is happening more and more with globalization. So yeah, this is a bit not a bit limited. This tool is a bit limited for people that becoming more globetrotters. And yeah, but in general, as we saw with all these values, it is also very, and that we see that me and Bindu are closer to each other. It is very important to not forget also context and character in order to make design for the people you are addressing to, as we saw in the beginning.
Yeah, and as we know that, or the way people process information, we always put people in buckets or boxes, as you would refer to in different countries. And however, so I think we should move towards more inclusive stereotypes, because yeah, stereotypes won't go away. However, the danger of a single story still exists. But if we look at people from three different lenses, like what is their context, where are they currently living, what is their profession, what experiences have they had, what is their character, and from which culture are they from, at the junction of these, can we have a bit more of inclusive stereotypes? And we came up with this framework as we were working towards this idea of how can we understand cultural differences, and I had a discussion with my colleague where she said, "Oh, you did this because you're Indian." I said, "Actually, that's not right. You also have to consider my context as someone that has moved from one country to another, and maybe something about my character, and only then can it give you a better picture." So, with regard to this topic, we've spoken at few meetups and events so far, and it's very interesting to see the discussion that is triggered from it. And one of the most important takeaways always is we have and like my favorite poet says, Robert Frost, and miles to go before I sleep. I think we need to keep having these discussions until it becomes a mainstream topic, so that no one then pays attention to it because it becomes very natural to you. So or that we don't consciously pay attention to this, but until then we think that this topic deserves a bit more attention, and we are going to continue speaking about this topic more. So that's it from our side. If you have any questions, please tweet them to hashtag ID24U, and maybe the host can give you more information.
Thank you very much, Anna and Bindu. That was a wonderful talk. And as you said, just towards the end, it's fantastic to get another perspective on inclusive design, cultural and international this time. So thank you both very much indeed. Russ, how are we doing for questions?
Yeah, there's a couple here. The first one is you reference a wide range of resources there. All of them are fantastic, and I know myself and others will probably want to know where we could read more on. Are you going to share all of those findings in a list of potential resources for people?
Yeah, we would love to do that. So I think we've written a blog post, and then maybe in a few days or a week or so, we will share the resources. So
Oh,
that
fantastic! That'd be great. And if you attach the ID24 hashtag to it, then people could follow up with it. That'd be great.
yes, indeed. Also, yeah, they do have the presentation, and so some of the links are already here. But we will definitely share more information.
Fantastic. Another question is, you talked about addressing individual groups and cultures, and what about when you've got a bigger challenge, like if you're designing a website that has to address like multiple cultures, or it's being sent out to multiple countries? How do you tackle those sort of problems when there's a much bigger audience across different cultures?
Well, a lot of countries that, like as you saw with McDonald's, they have different websites for different countries. So depending on the size and maybe the way the importance the company gives to this, they do localization, and they do check it for the different countries. However, yeah, if you're just starting, you can just at least and you don't you start with one thing, maybe it's prototype, or I don't know. I would pay attention to not offend somebody. So I would pay attention to certain values that could potentially offend other cultures and keep them in mind and try to avoid that. That is what I would start with. However, depending on what you are designing, it can be very wise to put some money into this localization or designing for different cultural backgrounds, because one size fits all it sometimes doesn't work. It really depends on the context, I think, but it can save you also money, I think, to invest a little bit of money in that.
Yeah, indeed. If you cater to different populations, as we also see in talks related to accessibility, for example, I think that can be that can bring more money to the companies, because then there are more users from different contexts that can use the product. But however, if it is a product, say for a mechanical engineers doing a specific thing, their ways of working might be way more common than we know. So yeah.
Cool. And the last one is, it's on the wording of stereotype. I really love the map you did at the end there, where stereotypes were broken into those three categories. So that fantastic diagram, and the concept of inclusive stereotypes is really great. But I guess the question is, stereotypes as a word is very loaded, emotional, and often misused word.
Yeah.
Is there another word that could be put in there, if that makes sense? Like instead of inclusive stereotypes, is there some other word that's less loaded? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get it. And actually, I included the word stereotypes there for a reason.
Oh, cool.
Because, we are trying to get rid of stereotypes and trying to make sure that people are a bit more holistic when they look at other people. But maybe I'm a bit pessimistic that I don't believe that stereotypes are going away anytime soon. So the next step would be to move towards inclusive stereotypes. But yeah, we also had the same framework and in the beginning, where we say that good design lies at the intersection of these three. So that could also be replaced by more inclusive design or more inclusive solutions.
Yeah, it's a fantastic diagram. That's all questions that we have. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
I'm going to sneak a question in, if I may. So, I was really interested by the point you both made about when you provide feedback or design critique, bearing in mind how different cultures respond to commentary or criticism. And I found myself in large groups of people from all sorts of countries, and I've noticed a problem that can sometimes arise in the kind of speaking style from different cultures. So some countries, people from countries are very happy being quite abrupt, a little bit brash. They'll maybe make jokes as a way of kind of alleviating their stress of having to speak in public, whereas other cultures are perhaps more inclined to be very polite, more respectful, and that's their way of dealing with it. Do you have any suggestions on how, when we're in large multicultural groups, how we can manage those kind of collisions a little bit more?
You mean how to address when you are talking to a bigger group together?
Right, and when you've got maybe 2, 3, 4 different kind of cultural groups represented who may have very different ways of dealing with being in a public group forum situation.
Sorry. I think it's a good idea to make aware that there are differences, so they understand that it is that they actually understand what is meant by each other. So if you just it depends on what setting you are, but if you just bring it up in a casual way, or at least if you are aware about it, you can also try to facilitate it. It depends, of course, on what kind of meeting you are.
Yeah, at our company, when this happens, because we have people from different countries, what helps is at the beginning of the meeting or even before scheduling meeting, agree upon like, okay, this is the location, this is the agenda, so that everyone is aware and on the same page, of course. And they know what to expect, and okay, this is going to be a reflection session where we are going to give feedback to each other, or this will be a design review where this person. So I think just communicating and also asking people if they're fine with this kind of a setting could be useful. Because initially for me it was very difficult to deal with feedback when I'm in a large group, and especially negative feedback, because that would mean that I've failed. But with time, as the person assured me and as I saw more of it working, I've changed. But I think asking and keeping people informed could definitely help in this regard.
And understand that it is just done in certain countries that way. Like if when you learned, I suppose when you learned that that it is very direct feedback in the Netherlands, you might have understood better that it's not against you.
That it is not personal. Also, that's also very important, that they are not personally against you, but it's just the way people are.
And I guess the language too can play a role. If you're in a meeting where the language being spoken is not your first language, you can sometimes miss nuances or subtleties in what's being said that maybe would change the way you would receive that commentary or that feedback, and that can make it difficult too, I think.
Yes,
definitely.
Indeed. And also when English is not the first language, but if we have English as a language of the meeting, you can see that the confidence levels of people can also be affected by it. So sometimes just creating that safe space for meetings, I think, is way more important in those scenarios.
But I think really also that the facilitator is aware of these different cultures can really help.
Should be aware.
That's really my recommendation. If you would deal with who is in this meeting and you are aware of what they're used to in their culture.
If you don't have time, I would recommend reading Erin Meyer's book, Culture Map, because she gives a lot of examples of these kind of situations of meetings and how she initially dealt with it and sometimes was not so successful, and later what she learned through this.
Great. Thank you very much for that recommendation, and also for a truly interesting and informative talk. Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A reminder to everyone who is tuned in that ID24 is brought to you in partnership with Barclays Access, the Paciello Group, Intopia, Microsoft Edge, and Open Access Technologies, and with thanks to our sponsors, DQ Systems. If you haven't already, please head over to youtube.com/inclusivedesign24 and subscribe to the channel. And if you enjoyed this talk, which I'm sure you did, please consider hitting the like button to show your support for it. You can find us at ID24Conf on Twitter and throw questions at us and any of the presenters using the ID24 hashtag. And we will be back with you on the hour, this time with Alistair Campbell, who will be talking about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, what's it all about, and perhaps more importantly, what to do with it. So don't go away.